She was officially dead. Killed in action, Baghdad 2009. Her name etched on a memorial wall that her own mother visits every Veterans Day. The government buried an empty coffin. Her unit held a memorial service. And for 15 years, the world moved on without Agent Sarah Chen. But when a sniper's crosshairs found the Secretary of Defense at a NATO summit, when the most elite protection details froze in confusion, she stepped out of the shadows and did what everyone thought was impossible. She came back from the dead to save a life that would determine the fate of nations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Mercedes convoy rolled through Brussels with the kind of precision that screamed diplomatic importance. Black sedans with tinted windows, motorcycle escorts weaving through traffic that had been cleared minutes before their arrival. The kind of motorcade that made ordinary citizens pause on sidewalks and wonder which world leader was passing through their city on this gray March morning. Inside the lead vehicle, Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawthorne reviewed her speech notes one final time. The NATO summit was entering its critical phase, and her presentation on joint intelligence sharing could reshape military cooperation for the next decade. She glanced at her Rolex, calculating arrival time at the Brussels Convention Center where heads of state from 32 nations waited. What she didn't notice was the woman standing perfectly still beside a newspaper kiosk 3 blocks ahead. Someone who shouldn't have existed, who had been declared dead by 3 separate government agencies, whose fingerprints had been scrubbed from every database that mattered. But there she stood, watching the approaching convoy with eyes that missed nothing. Sarah Chen had been living as Elena Vasquez for so long that sometimes she forgot her real name. Coffee shop owner in a sleepy Spanish coastal town, known for her excellent cortados and the way she never quite lost that American accent despite 15 years abroad. Her customers thought she was charming, mysterious, in that way expats often were. They had no idea that the quiet woman who ground their coffee beans had once been the CIA's most effective deep-cover operative. The transition hadn't been voluntary. In 2009, during what should have been a routine extraction in Baghdad, everything went sideways faster than anyone could have predicted. Sarah's cover was blown, her contact network compromised, and hostile forces closing in from every direction. The agency had 2 choices: risk a military operation to extract her, potentially exposing ongoing operations across the Middle East, or declare her killed in action and let her disappear. They chose expediency over loyalty. Sarah Chen died officially in an IED explosion that destroyed a safe house in Baghdad's green zone. The blast was real enough, the casualties genuine, but Sarah herself had already slipped away into the underground network she'd spent 3 years building. By the time her memorial service was held in Langley, she was already in Morocco using documents that would have made her former colleagues weep with professional admiration. For 15 years, she'd maintained perfect operational security. No contact with her old life, no digital footprint that could be traced, no emotional attachments that could be exploited. She ran her coffee shop, dated a local fisherman named Miguel who made her laugh, and almost convinced herself that Agent Sarah Chen had truly died in that Baghdad safe house. Almost. The call had come through channels so buried that most intelligence professionals didn't even know they existed. A single encrypted message that used authentication codes Sarah thought had been burned years ago. 3 words that changed everything. Prometheus is active. Prometheus. The assassination program that Sarah had spent her final months at the agency trying to expose. A rogue network operating within NATO intelligence services, selling targeted killings to the highest bidder while maintaining plausible deniability through layers of cutouts and false flag operations. Sarah had gotten close, too close, which was why she'd ended up burned and abandoned in Baghdad. But Prometheus had grown beyond even her worst fears. The encrypted message contained intelligence that made her blood run cold. Secretary Hawthorne wasn't just attending a NATO summit, she was walking into an execution orchestrated by people who were supposed to protect her. Sarah had exactly 4 hours to travel from her quiet Spanish village to Brussels, infiltrate a security perimeter designed by the world's best protection specialists, and stop an assassination that would be blamed on foreign terrorists while the real perpetrators walked away clean. 4 hours to come back from the dead and prevent a murder that could destabilize global security. She closed her coffee shop, kissed Miguel goodbye with promises she knew she might not be able to keep, and drove north through France with documents that identified her as Dr. Anna Hoffman, a German cultural attaché with impeccable credentials and legitimate business at the NATO summit. Now she stood beside that Brussels newspaper stand, watching the convoy approach while calculating angles, timing, and probabilities. The secretary's route was public information, shared through diplomatic channels with dozens of agencies. But Sarah knew something that legitimate security details didn't. Prometheus operatives had spent months mapping every aspect of this convoy, every protocol, every contingency plan. They would strike during the transfer from vehicle to building, those vulnerable 30 seconds when even the best protection details couldn't control every variable. A single suppressed shot from an elevated position, probably the office building across from the convention center's main entrance. Close enough for accuracy, high enough for escape routes, positioned perfectly to frame the shot as coming from the opposite direction. Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted update from her source. The shooter was already in position, weapon deployed, waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone. Belgian federal police had been fed false intelligence about a different threat, drawing their attention away from the real danger. Even the secretary's own protective detail had been compromised, their communications monitored, their responses predicted and countered. The convoy was 3 blocks away now, motorcycle escorts clearing intersections with practiced efficiency. Secretary Hawthorne would be reviewing her notes, trusting her security team, believing that dozens of armed professionals were keeping her safe. She had no idea that her protection detail included at least 2 Prometheus assets who would ensure their weapons jammed at precisely the wrong moment. Sarah checked her watch and began moving through the gathering crowd of diplomats, journalists, and security personnel surrounding the convention center. Her credentials were perfect, her cover story rehearsed to the point of becoming second nature. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she appeared to be, another mid-level diplomatic functionary attending another tedious international summit. But beneath her conservative blazer, Sarah carried tools that would have raised eyebrows in any legitimate diplomatic gathering. A ceramic knife that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, communication devices that operated on frequencies most security services didn't monitor, and the kind of situational awareness that came from surviving in hostile territories where a single mistake meant death. She'd worked protection details before, during her early years at the agency. She understood the psychology, the protocols, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between a successful assignment and a catastrophic failure. More importantly, she understood how those protocols could be turned against themselves by someone who knew the system from the inside. The convoy rounded the final corner, black Mercedes sedans reflecting the gray Brussels sky like mirrors. Sarah positioned herself near the convention center's main entrance, just another face in a crowd of international officials. Her earpiece crackled with intercepted security communications, voices she didn't recognize discussing perimeter status and arrival procedures. But she was listening for something else, the subtle changes in radio chatter that would indicate the assassination was beginning. When Prometheus struck, they would do it with military precision, timing their shot to coincide with communication disruptions that would delay emergency response by crucial seconds. Secretary Hawthorne's sedan pulled to the curb exactly on schedule.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah watched through the crowd as the protection detail began their choreographed routine, each agent moving to predetermined positions that had been practiced dozens of times. What they didn't know was that Prometheus had observed those same routines, identified the gaps, and positioned their assets to exploit every vulnerability. The secretary stepped out of her vehicle, briefcase in hand, already turning toward the convention center entrance where NATO officials waited to escort her inside. 30 yards away, Sarah saw the subtle hand signal pass between two men she'd identified as compromised agents. In approximately 15 seconds, they would create the distraction that would give the shooter his opening. Sarah began moving through the crowd with deliberate purpose, no longer pretending to be a casual observer. She had one chance to prevent an assassination that would be remembered as a security failure of historic proportions. One chance to save a woman who had no idea she was walking into a perfectly orchestrated trap. One chance to prove that Sarah Chen hadn't really died in Baghdad 15 years ago. The first sign of trouble was barely perceptible. Agent Morrison, part of Secretary Hawthorne's inner protection circle, shifted his weight slightly and touched his earpiece with the practiced casualness of someone receiving new instructions. But I'd been watching him for the past 10 minutes, and his body language told a different story than his calm exterior suggested. His partner, Agent Rodriguez, was positioned near the convention center's glass doors, supposedly scanning for threats in the gathering crowd. Instead, his eyes kept drifting to his watch and then to the office building across the street. Third floor, corner window, exactly where my intelligence had indicated the shooter would be positioned. Secretary Hawthorne moved through her security bubble with the confident stride of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. She paused to shake hands with the Belgian foreign minister, smiled for photographers, and generally projected the kind of diplomatic composure that made for good television coverage. Behind her, 6 agents maintained their protective formation with clockwork precision. What she couldn't see was the subtle choreography unfolding around her. Morrison had moved 3 steps to his left, creating a gap in coverage that would last exactly long enough for a skilled shooter to acquire target. Rodriguez was no longer watching the crowd, he was watching the building where death waited behind plate glass. I calculated distances and angles with the kind of cold mathematics that had kept me alive through 7 years of deep cover operations. 60 meters from the shooter's position to where Secretary Hawthorne stood. Clean line of sight once Morrison completed his repositioning. Wind was minimal, lighting conditions perfect for optical targeting. The shooter would fire in approximately 45 seconds. I began moving through the crowd with purposeful urgency, no longer maintaining the casual demeanor of a diplomatic observer. My cover identity as Dr. Anna Hoffman would have to hold long enough to get me close to the secretary's protective detail, but after that, operational security became irrelevant. Agent Chen, the detail leader whose name I'd memorized from intelligence reports, stood closest to Secretary Hawthorne. Unlike Morrison and Rodriguez, his attention remained focused on genuine threat assessment. He swept the crowd with professional paranoia, his hand never straying far from his concealed weapon. But even the best protection specialist couldn't account for threats from within his own team. I was 20 feet away when Morrison's earpiece crackled with what I knew would be the go signal. His shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and he began the final movement that would expose Secretary Hawthorne to the shooter's crosshairs. That's when I did something that shattered every protocol governing diplomatic events. I drew the ceramic knife from beneath my blazer and pressed it against Morrison's throat in a motion too fast for anyone in the crowd to properly register. The blade was sharp enough to part skin with minimal pressure, and I applied just enough force to make him understand the seriousness of his situation. "Move 1 more inch and I open your carotid artery," I whispered in his ear, my voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from making similar threats in much more dangerous circumstances. Morrison froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his weapon, stopped halfway to his holster. Around us, the diplomatic crowd continued their polite conversations, unaware that an assassination attempt was being prevented 3 feet from where they stood discussing trade agreements and military cooperation. Agent Chen noticed the disruption immediately. His training kicked in as he saw an unknown woman holding a blade to his colleague's throat, and his weapon cleared leather with professional speed. But I was already talking, my voice pitched just loud enough for him to hear over the ambient noise of the gathering. "Agent Chen, your partner Morrison is compromised, so is Rodriguez by the door. Check the 3rd floor corner window of the building across the street. You'll find a sniper with Secretary Hawthorne in his scope right now." Chen's eyes flicked toward the building I'd indicated, then back to me, processing information at light speed. His weapon remained drawn, but he hadn't raised it to firing position. Professional uncertainty warred with ingrained protective instincts. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled aggression. "Someone who's been dead for 15 years, I replied, maintaining my grip on Morrison while scanning the crowd for Rodriguez's reaction. "And someone who's about to save your principal's life." Secretary Hawthorne, still engaged in conversation with the Belgian foreign minister, remained blissfully unaware that her survival now depends on split-second decisions being made by people she'd never met. Rodriguez had noticed the confrontation developing around Morrison. Instead of moving to assist his compromised colleague, he began backing toward the convention center's entrance. Flight, not fight, the reaction of someone whose loyalties lie elsewhere. I made a calculated decision that went against every instinct I'd developed during my years in deep cover. I released Morrison, stepped back, and raised my hands in a gesture of apparent surrender. But my eyes never left Agent Chen's face as I delivered the information that would either save Secretary Hawthorne's life or get me killed. Prometheus Network. Assassination contract on your principal. The shot comes in 30 seconds unless you move her now. The word Prometheus hit Chen like a physical blow. His weapon wavered as he processed implications that stretched far beyond a single diplomatic event. Prometheus was legend in intelligence circles, a ghost story that senior agents whispered about but never quite believed. Morrison, freed from my blade but still within striking distance, made his own choice. His hand went for his weapon with desperate speed, no longer caring about maintaining operational cover. But 15 years of surviving in hostile territories had taught me to read violent intent long before it became violent action. I moved inside his jaw, my elbow connecting with his solar plexus hard enough to double him over. The ceramic knife found the pressure point at the base of his skull, and he collapsed unconscious before his weapon cleared holster. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. Agent Chen watched Morrison fall and made the kind of battlefield decision that separates professionals from bureaucrats. He trusted the woman who had just neutralized a threat he hadn't even recognized. "Rodriguez," he barked into his radio, "abort movement to entrance, maintain position." But Rodriguez was already gone, disappeared into the crowd with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd planned his exit strategy long before arriving at the venue. "Secretary Hawthorne," Chen called out, his voice carrying enough authority to interrupt diplomatic pleasantries, "we need to move inside immediately." The secretary looked up from her conversation, her expression shifting from polite attention to concern as she registered the tension in her protection detail leader's voice. Years of navigating political crises had taught her to recognize when situations were deteriorating. "What's the situation?" she asked, already moving toward the convention center entrance without waiting for a complete explanation. I scanned the office building across the street, looking for movement in the third-floor corner window. The shooter would be adjusting his timeline now, adapting to the disruption in his carefully orchestrated plan. Professional assassins didn't abandon missions because of minor complications. "The threat is still active," I told Chen, keeping pace with the secretary's protective formation as they moved toward the building entrance. "Your shooter has backup protocols. He'll take the shot if he gets any opportunity." Chen spoke rapidly into his radio, coordinating with perimeter security elements that had been unaware of the internal compromise. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Prometheus operatives planned for contingencies, including the possibility that their assets might be discovered. The glass doors of the convention center were 30 feet away when I saw the glint of reflected light from the office building. Not sunlight off window glass, but the distinctive flash of optical equipment. A rifle scope catching ambient light as the shooter made final targeting adjustments. Secretary Hawthorne was still exposed, still vulnerable despite the protection detail surrounding her. The angle was more difficult now, but a skilled marksman could still make the shot if he was willing to accept higher risk. I looked at the distance to the building entrance, calculated the secretary's walking speed, and realized we weren't going to make it. The shooter had his opportunity, and he was going to take it. That's when I made the decision that would either save a life or end my 15-year exile from the world I'd once called home. I broke from the protective formation and sprinted directly toward the line of fire, positioning myself between Secretary Hawthorne and the distant rifle scope. Agent Chen shouted something behind me, but his words were lost in the sudden chaos as I threw myself across the kill zone where a bullet was already traveling at 2,000 feet per second. The bullet passed so close to my head that I felt the displacement of air against my cheek. It struck the concrete steps behind me with a sharp crack that sent fragments ricocheting in every direction. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, I lay sprawled across the pavement where I'd thrown myself, calculating whether the shooter would have time for a second shot. He wouldn't. Agent Chen had processed the situation with the lightning-fast decision-making that kept principles alive in hostile environments. Instead of trying to understand who I was or why I'd intervened, he'd focused on the immediate threat. Secretary Hawthorne was already being hustled through the convention center's reinforced doors by the remainder of her protection detail. I rolled to my feet and sprinted toward the office building across the street, knowing that every second of delay gave the shooter more time to implement his escape protocol. The crowd of diplomats and journalists had finally registered that something was wrong, their polite conversations dissolving into confused murmurs and nervous laughter as they tried to process the disruption. Behind me, Chen barked orders into his radio, coordinating with Belgian federal police to lock down the perimeter. But I knew Prometheus operatives too well to believe that conventional law enforcement would be fast enough to prevent the shooter's escape. These weren't amateurs working with improvised equipment. They were professionals who'd planned every aspect of this operation, including multiple exit strategy. The office building's lobby was the kind of sterile corporate space found in every major city, all marble floors and abstract artwork designed to convey success without personality. The security desk was unmanned, which told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Prometheus had prepared this venue. I bypassed the elevators and hit the emergency stairwell at a dead run, taking the steps 3 at a time. My lungs burned with the effort, reminding me that 15 years of grinding coffee beans hadn't maintained the cardiovascular fitness that deep cover operations required. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and my body remembered how to push through discomfort when lives depended on speed. The third-floor corridor was empty, except for the kind of generic office furniture that property management companies use to make vacant spaces look occupied. I followed the sound of rapid footsteps toward the corner office where the shooter had positioned himself. The door was already open when I arrived, revealing a window that offered a perfect view of where Secretary Hawthorne had been standing moments earlier. A high-powered rifle lay abandoned on the floor next to a bipod and laser rangefinder. Professional equipment, but nothing that could be traced back to any particular intelligence service. The shooter was gone, but he'd left behind something that made my blood freeze. A photograph of me taken 3 days earlier outside my coffee shop in Spain, with coordinates and timing information written in the margins. They'd known exactly who I was and where to find me. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the same source who'd warned me about the assassination attempt. 3 words that confirmed my worst fears. You are blown. 15 years of operational security had just evaporated. My cover identity as Elena Vasquez was compromised. My location in Spain was known, and every aspect of the life I'd built was now a liability. Miguel, my customers, the quiet existence that had allowed me to believe Sarah Chen could stay dead, all of it was finished. I photographed the abandoned rifle and the coordinates with my phone, then made my way back toward the stairwell. But footsteps echoing from below told me that Belgian police had finally responded to Chen's radio calls. I could hear multiple voices coordinating a floor-by-floor search of the building. Instead of descending, I climbed. The roof access was locked, but locks were problems I'd solved in more challenging circumstances than a Brussels office building. The office building's lobby was the kind of sterile corporate space found in every major city, all marble floors and abstract artwork designed to convey success without personality. The security desk was unmanned, which told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly Prometheus had prepared this venue. I bypassed the elevators and hit the emergency stairwell at a dead run, taking the steps 3 at a time. My lungs burned with the effort, reminding me that 15 years of grinding coffee beans hadn't maintained the cardiovascular fitness that deep cover operations required. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and my body remembered how to push through discomfort when lives depended on speed. The third-floor corridor was empty, except for the kind of generic office furniture that property management companies use to make vacant spaces look occupied. I followed the sound of rapid footsteps toward the corner office where the shooter had positioned himself. The door was already open when I arrived, revealing a window that offered a perfect view of where Secretary Hawthorne had been standing moments earlier. A high-powered rifle lay abandoned on the floor next to a bipod and laser rangefinder. Professional equipment, but nothing that could be traced back to any particular intelligence service. The shooter was gone, but he'd left behind something that made my blood freeze. A photograph of me taken 3 days earlier outside my coffee shop in Spain, with coordinates and timing information written in the margins. They'd known exactly who I was and where to find me. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the same source who'd warned me about the assassination attempt. 3 words that confirmed my worst fears. You are blown. 15 years of operational security had just evaporated. My cover identity as Elena Vasquez was compromised, my location in Spain was known, and every aspect of the life I'd built was now a liability. Miguel, my customers, the quiet existence that had allowed me to believe Sarah Chen could stay dead, all of it was finished. I photographed the abandoned rifle and the coordinates with my phone, then made my way back toward the stairwell. But footsteps echoing from below told me that Belgian police had finally responded to Chen's radio calls. I could hear multiple voices coordinating a floor-by-floor search of the building. But I knew Prometheus operatives too well to believe that conventional law enforcement would be fast enough to prevent the shooter's escape. These weren't amateurs working with improvised equipment. They were professionals who'd planned every aspect of this operation, including multiple exit strategy. The office building's lobby was the kind of sterile corporate space found in every major city.
30 seconds with tools from my diplomatic bag, and I was breathing cold March air while surveying the cityscape that stretched in every direction. The shooter's escape route became obvious from this vantage point. A service ladder led to the adjacent building, which connected to a parking structure that offered vehicle access without street-level observation. Clean, professional, and almost impossible to intercept once the operation was in motion. My phone rang with a call from a number I hadn't seen in 15 years. Agency emergency contact protocols that should have been burned after my official death in Baghdad. I answered it anyway because curiosity had always been one of my more dangerous character traits. "Sarah Chen," a voice said. Not a question, but a statement delivered with the flat certainty of someone reading from a classified file. "You have me confused with someone else," I replied, maintaining operational discipline even though we both knew the pretense was pointless. "The woman who died in Baghdad 15 years ago. The woman who's been running a coffee shop in Marrakesh under the name Elena Vasquez. The woman who just prevented the assassination of the Secretary of Defense using skills that officially don't exist." I said nothing, letting silence do the work that words would have complicated. "My name is Deputy Director Harrison," the voice continued. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." "Then you know I'm dead." "Officially, yes, but the living have a way of making their presence known when it matters most. We need to meet." "We don't need to do anything," I replied, already calculating exit routes from the rooftop. "I fulfilled my obligation to prevent an international incident. My involvement ends here." "Your involvement ended the moment you stepped out of the shadows to save Secretary Hawthorne's life. Prometheus knows you're alive now, which means the people who burned you in Baghdad are going to come looking for answers you probably don't want to give them." That stopped me cold. Prometheus hadn't just been targeting Secretary Hawthorne, they'd been hunting me. The assassination attempt had been bait, designed to draw me into the open where I could be identified and eliminated. I'd walked directly into a trap that had been 15 years in the making. Where? I asked, because sometimes survival required accepting help from people whose motives remained unclear. The atomium. 1 hour. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you collected from the shooter's position. We have a lot to discuss about people who are supposed to be dead. The line went dead, leaving me alone on a Brussels rooftop with the kind of tactical problems I'd spent 15 years avoiding. Below, police sirens wailed through streets that had become hostile territory the moment my face appeared in intelligence databases that were supposed to have forgotten Sarah Chen existed. I made my way down through the building using maintenance corridors and service elevators, emerging into an alley that connected to the city's metro system. My diplomatic credentials would hold up under casual scrutiny, but serious background checks would reveal inconsistencies that would trap me in Belgium indefinitely. The train ride to the atomium gave me time to process the implications of what had just happened. Secretary Hawthorne was safe, but her protection had been compromised at the highest levels. Prometheus had resources and intelligence that suggested connections throughout NATO's security apparatus. And I was no longer a ghost. I was a target. Deputy Director Harrison waited near the atomium's base, a man in his 50s who carried himself with the particular combination of confidence and paranoia that marked senior intelligence officials. He spotted me immediately, despite the crowd of tourists, confirming that my operational security was completely blown. "Agent Chen," he said as I approached, "you look good for someone who's been dead since 2009. "You look like someone who has answers I'm not going to enjoy hearing," I replied. He smiled without humor and gestured toward a bench that offered clear sightlines in every direction. Professional habit, even in supposedly safe environments. "Prometheus didn't just want Secretary Hawthorne dead," he said without preamble. "They wanted you alive. The assassination attempt was secondary to confirming that Sarah Chen had survived Baghdad and establishing your current capabilities." "Why?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything I'd believed about my exile. "Because 15 years ago, you got closer to identifying Prometheus leadership than anyone before or since. You were burned not to protect ongoing operations, but to protect the people who were selling those operations to the highest bidder." He handed me a tablet displaying personnel files that made my stomach clench with recognition. Faces I'd trusted, operations I'd believed in, colleagues who attended my memorial service while knowing I was still alive. "We've been building a case against the network ever since your supposed death," Harrison continued. "But we needed someone who'd survived their elimination attempts to testify about what they'd discovered. Someone who had nothing left to lose." I stared at the files, processing betrayals that went years before my exile in Baghdad. People I'd worked with, laughed with, trusted with my life. All of them connected to an assassination network that sold American secrets while wearing American uniforms. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Help us finish what you started in Baghdad," Harrison replied. "Help us destroy Prometheus from the inside, using the skills that officially died 15 years ago." I looked across Brussels, at a city where I'd just prevented one assassination while walking directly into another trap. Miguel was probably wondering why I'd left so suddenly. My coffee shop customers were expecting their morning cortados, and the quiet life I'd built was dissolving like sugar in rain. But some things were more important than personal safety. Some betrayals demanded answers that could only come from the shadows where the dead were supposed to stay buried. "When do we start?" I asked, because Sarah Chen had always finished what she started, even when it took 15 years and coming back from the dead to do it. The safe house in Vienna looked like every other intelligence facility I'd operated from over the years. Sterile furniture, reinforced windows, and the kind of electronic countermeasures that turned casual conversations into expensive static for anyone trying to listen. But what made this location different was the wall of photographs that Deputy Director Harrison had assembled over the past decade and a half. My face stared back at me from surveillance footage taken in Madrid, Barcelona, and a dozen other European cities. Someone had been tracking my movements for years, documenting the life of Elena Vasquez with the methodical patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The realization that my quiet existence had been under observation the entire time left me feeling exposed in ways that 15 years of operational experience couldn't quite cushion. "We've been watching you since 2011, Harrison admitted, pouring coffee from a machine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Not to bring you in, but to make sure Prometheus didn't find you first. Your survival was more valuable to us than your active participation." "Until now," I said, studying a photograph of Miguel and me walking along the Cadaqués waterfront. The image was recent enough that I could see the engagement ring he'd bought but hadn't yet worked up the courage to offer. A life interrupted by bullets and betrayals that stretched back decades. "Until now," Harrison agreed. "The Brussels operation changed everything. Prometheus knows you're active again, which means they'll accelerate their timeline for whatever they've been planning. We need to move first." He activated a wall display that showed a network analysis spanning multiple continents. Names connected by lines of communication, financial transactions, and operational relationships that painted a picture of corruption so extensive it made my stomach clench with professional outrage. "This is what we've built since your apparent death," Harrison continued. "Prometheus isn't just an assassination network. They're an intelligence marketplace. They steal classified information from NATO allies, package it for sale to hostile nations, and eliminate anyone who gets close to exposing their operations." The names on the display included people I'd worked with during my active years. Division chiefs, station heads, analysts whose judgment I'd trusted during operations where trust meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Seeing them connected to a network that sold American secrets felt like discovering that gravity worked in reverse. "Agent Morrison, the man you neutralized in Brussels, was just a foot soldier," Harrison explained. "The real power structure operates at levels where congressional oversight becomes a formality and presidential briefings are edited to remove inconvenient truths." I traced the connections between various nodes on the network diagram, identifying operational patterns that reminded me of cases I'd worked 15 years earlier. Financial flows that disappeared into shell companies, communication channels that bounced through servers in countries without extradition treaties, personnel transfers that moved compromised assets away from investigators just before evidence surfaced. "You want me to infiltrate them?" I said, because the tactical requirements were obvious once you understood the scope of the problem. "We want you to destroy them," Harrison corrected. "Infiltration implies we're looking for information. We already have information. What we need is someone who can get close enough to their leadership to prevent them from disappearing when we move to arrest them." He handed me a file containing documents that made the morning's assassination attempt look like a minor inconvenience. Financial records showing payments to terrorist organizations in exchange for intelligence about American operations. Communication intercepts revealing plans to eliminate CIA officers whose investigations were getting too close to the truth. A list of assets whose covers had been blown and sold to hostile intelligence services for execution. "They've been selling our people for 15 years, Harrison said quietly. "Officers who thought they were being burned by operational necessity were actually being murdered by colleagues who profited from their deaths." The weight of that revelation settled over me like cold water. Every intelligence officer who died in the field since 2009 was potentially a victim of the network I'd been investigating when my own cover was blown. Every family who'd received a folded flag and a letter about patriotic sacrifice had actually lost someone to a marketplace where American lives were just another commodity for sale. "What's the operational timeline?" I asked, because anger was a luxury that intelligence professionals couldn't afford when lives depended on clear thinking. 3 weeks, Harrison replied. "We've identified a Prometheus gathering scheduled for next month in Monaco, high-level leadership meeting disguised as a private defense contractors conference. They'll be consolidating their operations and planning expansion into Asian markets." He showed me surveillance photographs of a luxury resort where men in expensive suits conducted business that would have been treason in any rational legal framework. The kind of gathering where state secrets were traded like baseball cards and assassination contracts were negotiated over champagne and catered horse affers. Your mission is to establish yourself as a potential asset, Harrison continued. Someone with access to classified information who can be turned for the right price. They'll want to vet you personally before agreeing to any substantial transactions. And when they realize I'm the agent they've been hunting for 15 years? They won't, Harrison said, with the kind of confidence that comes from extensive planning. Because Sarah Chen is dead, and has been since 2009. You'll be approaching them as Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former Spanish intelligence officer with financial difficulties and access to NATO classified material. He handed me a new identity package that was so thoroughly documented it could have fooled investigators who knew what to look for. Bank records showing mounting debts, personnel files detailing a career in Spanish military intelligence that ended in professional disgrace, even medical records establishing psychological profiles that would make me attractive to recruiters looking for vulnerable assets. The legend is solid, Harrison assured me. We've been building Dr. Vasquez's background for 3 years, establishing digital footprints and paper trails that will satisfy even paranoid vetting procedures. I studied the documents that would transform me from a dead CIA operative into a corrupt Spanish officer willing to sell secrets for money. The transition felt disturbingly natural, like putting on clothes that had been tailored specifically for my measurements. What about Miguel?
I asked, because personal attachments were always the weak points in operational security. He thinks you're attending a professional conference in Switzerland, Harrison replied. Tourism and hospitality management seminar for small business owners. Very boring, very legitimate, and completely consistent with someone looking to expand their coffee shop operation. The cover story was perfect in its mundane believability. Miguel would miss me but wouldn't worry, and my regular customers would understand why their favorite barista needed to travel for professional development. Another lie in a life that had been built on necessary deceptions. There's one more thing, Harrison said, his tone shifting into the careful neutrality that preceded information people didn't want to deliver. We believe Prometheus has been planning something beyond simple intelligence sales. The Monaco gathering isn't just about expanding their marketplace. He activated another display showing satellite imagery of shipping containers moving through ports in Hamburg, Rotterdam, and Marseille. The containers were unmarked, but their routing and timing suggested coordination that went far beyond commercial logistics. They're positioning assets for a major operation, Harrison continued, something that requires physical resources rather than just information. We don't know what they're planning, but the timeline coincides with several high-profile diplomatic events scheduled for the next 6 months. I stared at the shipping routes and felt the familiar chill that came from recognizing patterns that others had missed. Prometheus wasn't just selling secrets, they were preparing to use those secrets for something that would make the Brussels assassination attempt look like a warm-up exercise. How many people are we talking about? I asked. Conservative estimate? 50,000 casualties if they succeed. Worst-case scenario? Harrison paused, meeting my eyes with the kind of direct gaze that conveyed information without words. We're looking at the kind of event that changes the global political landscape permanently. The mathematics of mass casualty events had always been abstract until you'd seen the aftermath personally. I'd walked through villages in Afghanistan where improvised explosive devices had turned wedding celebrations into memorial services. The idea of Prometheus applying that same destructive capability on a larger scale with better resources made my hands shake with suppressed rage. When do I leave for Monaco? I asked, because some missions were too important for personal considerations. Tomorrow, Harrison replied. Elena Vasquez has gambling debts to pay and secrets to sell. And Sarah Chen has ghosts to bury once and for all. The Monte Carlo casino gleamed like a jewel against the Mediterranean night, its Belle Epoque architecture illuminated by lights that turned the building into a monument to old-world elegance and new money excess. From my position on the Hotel Hermitage's balcony, I could see the steady stream of luxury vehicles delivering guests to what the world believed was an exclusive defense contractors conference.
Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and armored Mercedes sedans that cost more than most people's houses disgorged passengers who moved with the particular confidence that came from wielding power over life and death. But I wasn't watching the cars. I was studying the security arrangements that surrounded the casino like invisible walls. Counter-surveillance teams positioned in shops and cafes throughout Monaco's narrow streets. Communication equipment disguised as tourist photography gear. The kind of protection detail that suggested the gathering inside represented interests far more dangerous than legitimate business concerns. My earpiece crackled with Harrison's voice, transmitted through encrypted channels that bounced signals off 3 different satellites before reaching my location. Prometheus leadership confirmed on site. We're tracking 17 high-value targets, including at least 3 individuals believed dead by their respective intelligence services. I adjusted the elegant black dress that transformed Dr. Elena Vasquez into exactly the kind of financially desperate intelligence officer that Prometheus recruiters would find irresistible. The outfit cost more than my coffee shop earned in a month, but it projected the right combination of professional competence and personal vulnerability that made assets attractive to handlers looking for reliable sources. "Audio surveillance is active," I whispered, testing the microscopic recording devices woven into my jewelry. "Visual confirmation systems operational." The past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in rapid identity construction. Elena Vasquez now had a complete digital footprint spanning 15 years of fabricated history. Bank accounts in Madrid showing mounting gambling debts. Personnel files documenting a promising military intelligence career derailed by alcohol dependency and poor judgment. Even psychological evaluations that painted her as someone's financial desperation outweighed her patriotic obligations. The legend was perfect because it contained enough truth to survive intensive scrutiny. I had worked Spanish intelligence during my CIA years, establishing contacts and relationships that could be verified by anyone with sufficient resources. The gambling addiction was fictional, but the financial pressure was mathematically precise, calibrated to suggest exactly the kind of vulnerability that made intelligence officers receptive to recruitment approaches. I descended through the hotel lobby, moving with the careful poise of someone who belonged in expensive surroundings but couldn't quite afford them comfortably. The Hermitage's marble floors reflected chandeliers that had witnessed conversations shaping European politics for over a century. Tonight, they would illuminate discussions that could determine whether democracy survived the next decade. The casino's main entrance was guarded by security personnel who looked more like military contractors than hospitality staff. Their weapons were concealed but visible to trained eyes, and their positioning covered every approach angle with overlapping fields of fire. Professional protection that suggested the gathering inside was worth killing to protect or infiltrate. My earpiece crackled with Harrison's voice, transmitted through encrypted channels that bounced signals off 3 different satellites before reaching my location. Prometheus leadership confirmed on site. We're tracking 17 high-value targets, including at least 3 individuals believed dead by their respective intelligence services. I adjusted the elegant black dress that transformed Dr. Elena Vasquez into exactly the kind of financially desperate intelligence officer that Prometheus recruiters would find irresistible. The outfit cost more than my coffee shop earned in a month, but it projected the right combination of professional competence and personal vulnerability that made assets attractive to handlers looking for reliable sources. "Audio surveillance is active," I whispered, testing the microscopic recording devices woven into my jewelry. "Visual confirmation systems operational." The past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in rapid identity construction. Elena Vasquez now had a complete digital footprint spanning 15 years of fabricated history. Bank accounts in Madrid showing mounting gambling debts. Personnel files documenting a promising military intelligence career derailed by alcohol dependency and poor judgment. Even psychological evaluations that painted her as someone whose financial desperation outweighed her patriotic obligations. The legend was perfect because it contained enough truth to survive intensive scrutiny. I had worked Spanish intelligence during my CIA years, establishing contacts and relationships that could be verified by anyone with sufficient resources.
The gambling addiction was fictional, but the financial pressure was mathematically precise, calibrated to suggest exactly the kind of vulnerability that made intelligence officers receptive to recruitment approaches. I descended through the hotel lobby, moving with the careful poise of someone who belonged in expensive surroundings but couldn't quite afford them comfortably. The Hermitage's marble floors reflected chandeliers that had witnessed conversations shaping European politics for over a century. Tonight, they would illuminate discussions that could determine whether democracy survived the next decade. The casino's main entrance was guarded by security personnel who looked more like military contractors than hospitality staff. Their weapons were concealed but visible to trained eyes, and their positioning covered every approach angle with overlapping fields of fire. Professional protection that suggested the gathering inside was worth killing to protect or infiltrate. My invitation had arrived through channels that would have impressed intelligence professionals who specialized in operational security. A business card left at my coffee shop by a customer who'd never returned. An email address that connected to servers in countries without extradition treaties. A telephone conversation that confirmed my identity through questions only Elena Vasquez could have answered correctly. The recruitment approach had been subtle, sophisticated, and absolutely convincing. Someone representing private defense interests had expressed interest in consulting services that could provide insights into NATO operational planning. The compensation offered was substantial enough to resolve Dr. Vasquez's financial difficulties permanently, with bonuses for particularly valuable intelligence. I presented my invitation to the security checkpoint, submitting to screening procedures that were thorough enough to detect most concealed weapons, but sophisticated enough to avoid obvious violations of Monaco's hospitality standards. The ceramic knife had been replaced by tools that looked like expensive cosmetics, but could function as weapons when circumstances required creative problem-solving.
Inside, the casino had been transformed into something that looked like a legitimate business conference. Display booths showcased defense technologies that were probably functional, but certainly served as cover for more sensitive discussions. Attendees moved through the space with the kind of casual networking behavior that characterized any high-level professional gathering. But the conversations I overheard while navigating toward the registration desk revealed interests that went far beyond conventional defense contracting. Shipping schedules that corresponded to intelligence I'd seen in Vienna. Personnel transfers that matched patterns Harrison's team had been tracking for months. Financial arrangements that used terminology more appropriate for weapons trafficking than legitimate business transactions. "Dr. Vasquez," a voice said behind me, and I turned to face a man whose photograph had occupied a prominent position in Harrison's intelligence files. Thomas Kellerman, former CIA deputy director, whose resignation in 2008 had been officially attributed to health concerns, but privately attributed to investigative attention from internal affairs. He extended his hand with the kind of practiced charm that made dangerous people attractive at cocktail parties. Impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, and carrying himself with the authority of someone accustomed to having his suggestions treated as commands. "Mr. Kellerman," I replied, shaking hands while maintaining the slightly nervous demeanor that would be appropriate for someone meeting potential employers who represented significant financial opportunity. "Thank you for the invitation. This is quite an impressive gathering." "We pride ourselves on bringing together like-minded professionals," Kellerman said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "People who understand that information has value beyond its original intended purpose." He guided me toward a quieter corner of the casino where leather chairs were arranged to provide privacy while maintaining sight lines that allowed occupants to observe the broader gathering. The positioning was tactically sound, offering both concealment and escape routes in case conversations became complicated. "Your background suggests exactly the kind of expertise our clients value," Kellerman continued, settling into a chair that put his back to the wall and his attention focused entirely on my reactions. "Spanish military intelligence provides access to NATO planning documents that would be extremely valuable to certain international interests." I leaned forward slightly, projecting the eager attention of someone whose financial desperation was overriding professional caution. "What kind of information are your clients seeking?" "Operational schedules, Personnel deployments, communications protocols, the kind of administrative details that seem mundane but become extremely valuable when aggregated and analyzed by people who understand their implications. Kellerman's description was clinical, professional, and completely divorced from the human consequences of selling military secrets to hostile intelligence services. He was discussing treason with the same casual tone most people used for restaurant recommendations. The compensation would be substantial, he continued, producing a tablet that displayed financial figures designed to resolve Elena Vasquez's mounting debts with considerable funds remaining. Initial payment for establishing access, with performance bonuses based on the quality and quantity of intelligence provided. I studied the numbers while calculating how much damage someone with Elena's clearance level could inflict if they decided to become a willing asset. The mathematics were terrifying. A single intelligence officer with access to NATO planning documents could compromise operations involving thousands of personnel across multiple continents. "This seems almost too good to be true," I said, allowing genuine concern to color my voice. "What guarantees do I have that this arrangement won't expose me to legal consequences?" Kellerman's smile became more genuine, as if he appreciated working with someone who understood the practical considerations involved in selling state secrets. "We've been facilitating these kinds of professional relationships for 15 years without a single asset being compromised through operational security failures. Our clients understand that protecting sources is essential to maintaining reliable intelligence flows." He activated another display on his tablet showing testimonials from assets whose faces were obscured but whose financial success was documented in detail. Bank account balances that suggested years of profitable collaboration. Luxury purchases that transformed government salaries into lifestyles appropriate for international consulting professionals. "Our most successful contributors have been able to establish financial independence while maintaining their official positions," Kellerman explained. "Careful operational security ensures that their patriotic service continues while their personal circumstances improve dramatically." The euphemisms were masterful. Treason became patriotic service. Espionage became professional relationships. Mass casualty terrorist attacks became international consulting projects. Kellerman had developed a vocabulary that allowed people to commit crimes against humanity while maintaining psychological comfort about their moral choices. "I'd need more about the operational requirements," I said, projecting the kind of practical caution that would be natural for someone considering such a dramatic career transition. "Access procedures, communication protocols, security measures that protect both parties." "Naturally," Kellerman agreed, standing and gesturing toward a private dining room where more detailed discussions could occur without casual observation. The dining room had been prepared for exactly this kind of recruitment meeting: comfortable seating, excellent wine, and electronic countermeasures that would defeat most surveillance equipment. But Harrison's technical team had anticipated such precautions, and my recording devices operated on frequencies that conventional jamming couldn't affect. 3 other men were already seated at the table when we arrived, each representing different aspects of the Prometheus network that Harrison's intelligence had only partially mapped. Financial specialists who laundered intelligence payments through legitimate business transactions. Operational planners who coordinated asset recruitment across multiple intelligence services. Technical experts who developed communication systems that kept espionage networks invisible to counterintelligence investigations. "Gentlemen, Dr. Elena Vasquez, whose background suggests exactly the kind of access our clients have been requesting." The introductions were performed using first names only, maintaining operational security that suggested these men had extensive experience managing human intelligence networks. But their faces would be recorded by my surveillance equipment, providing Harrison's team with identification opportunities that could unravel relationships spanning decades of collaborative treason. Dinner proceeded with the kind of civilized conversation that made mass murder sound like ambitious business development. They discussed shipping schedules for containers that I now understood contained weapons rather than legitimate cargo, personnel transfers that positioned Prometheus assets in locations where they could facilitate terrorist operations that would be blamed on foreign intelligence services.
The scope of their planning was breathtaking in its audacity. Simultaneous attacks on NATO facilities across 3 continents, coordinated to create maximum casualties while providing plausible deniability for state sponsors who preferred to conduct warfare through proxies. The kind of operational complexity that required years of preparation and resources that only intelligence professionals could provide. The timeline has been accelerated, one of the financial specialists mentioned casually while cutting his salmon.
Our Middle Eastern clients are eager to demonstrate their capabilities before certain political developments make such demonstrations more difficult to arrange. Election cycles create opportunities, another agreed. Public attention becomes focused on domestic concerns, which provides cover for international initiatives that might otherwise attract unwanted scrutiny. They were planning to influence American elections through terrorist attacks that would shift public opinion toward candidates who favored isolationist policies. Mass casualty events that would make Americans reluctant to maintain overseas commitments that interfered with hostile intelligence operations in Europe and Asia. I maintained my expression of eager attention while internally calculating the human cost of their casual conversation. 50,000 casualties had been Harrison's conservative estimate, but listening to their detailed planning suggested numbers that could reach into the hundreds of thousands if their coordination was successful. Dr. Vasquez's access could be particularly valuable for the German operations, Kellerman noted, consulting notes on his tablet. NATO logistics planning documents would allow our clients to identify vulnerabilities that conventional surveillance couldn't detect. The German operations. They were planning to attack American military facilities in Germany, using intelligence about security procedures and personnel schedules that someone like Elena Vasquez could provide. Soldiers who trusted their intelligence services to protect operational security would die because a fictional Spanish officer was selling their secrets to terrorists. What kind of timeline are we discussing? I asked, maintaining the interested tone of someone negotiating a business transaction rather than participating in genocide planning. Initial intelligence packages would be required within 6 weeks, Kellerman replied. Full operational intelligence no later than 4 months from today. The schedule is aggressive, but the compensation reflects the urgency our clients attach to this project. 4 months. They were giving themselves 4 months to collect enough intelligence to coordinate terrorist attacks that would kill American soldiers and European civilians while destroying NATO's ability to respond effectively to future aggression. 4 months to turn Elena Vasquez from a financially desperate intelligence officer into an accessory to mass murder. I'll need access to communication equipment that can't be traced back to my official position, I said, beginning the negotiation process that would establish my credibility while providing Harrison's team with technical intelligence about Prometheus's operational security. That can be arranged, one of the technical specialists assured me. We provide all assets with encrypted communication systems that appear to be commercial electronics but actually connect to servers that route messages through multiple countries before reaching their intended recipients. He produced a device that looked like an expensive smartphone but contained modifications that would allow it to access networks invisible to conventional internet monitoring. The kind of equipment that required substantial technical resources and suggested connections to intelligence services with advanced cyber warfare capabilities. The learning curve is minimal, he continued, demonstrating features that disguised espionage communications as routine social media activity. Your official supervisors will see normal personal use of commercial applications. Our network will receive intelligence formatted as encrypted data streams that appear to be routine software updates. The technical sophistication was impressive enough to make me genuinely concerned about counterintelligence services' ability to detect such communications. Prometheus wasn't just recruiting assets, they were providing those assets with tools that could defeat most surveillance systems currently used by NATO intelligence services. As the evening progressed, they outlined operational procedures that revealed years of experience managing espionage networks. Asset handling protocols that minimized exposure to counterintelligence investigation. Financial arrangements that disguised intelligence payments as legitimate consulting income. Security measures that protected both handlers and assets from discovery by their respective intelligence services. Our most successful assets maintain their official positions indefinitely, Kellerman explained as dinner concluded. Careful operational security allows them to provide intelligence for years without arousing suspicion from colleagues or supervisors. They were describing careers built on systematic betrayal, intelligence officers who sold their country's secrets while continuing to receive salaries paid by the same governments they were destroying. The psychological compartmentalization required for such sustained treason suggested recruitment techniques that identified individuals whose moral flexibility could be exploited over extended periods. "When would you need my final decision?" I asked, projecting the kind of practical urgency that would be natural for someone whose financial situation required quick resolution. "Tonight would be preferable," Kellerman replied, his tone shifting into something more businesslike. "Our clients are eager to begin receiving intelligence, and delayed commitments create security vulnerabilities that benefit neither party." The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. They wanted Elena Vasquez to commit to treason immediately, before she could reconsider or seek advice from colleagues who might discourage such career transitions. Standard recruitment procedure for intelligence services that understood how quickly moral clarity could reassert itself when targets had time to think clearly. I appeared to consider their offer carefully, weighing financial benefits against professional risks with the kind of mathematical precision that would convince them Elena's desperation was overriding her patriotic obligations. After several minutes of apparent internal debate, I nodded with the expression of someone making an irreversible decision. "I accept," I said simply, knowing that Harrison's surveillance team was recording every word of my apparent recruitment by an international terrorism network. The celebration that followed was restrained but genuine. These men understood they had just acquired access to NATO intelligence that could facilitate attacks killing thousands of people, and their satisfaction was evident despite professional attempts to maintain emotional neutrality. They shook hands with someone they believed would help them commit mass murder, and they did it with smiles that suggested such transactions were routine business matters. What they didn't understand was that Elena Vasquez had never existed, except in databases designed to attract exactly this kind of recruitment approach. The desperate Spanish intelligence officer with gambling debts and flexible morality was a fiction created by people who understand that the best way to destroy espionage networks is to infiltrate them with assets whose loyalty belonged elsewhere. Kellerman provided me with contact procedures, communication equipment, and initial intelligence requirements that would allow Harrison's team to map Prometheus operations with precision that conventional surveillance couldn't achieve. The modified smartphone contained not only Prometheus communication software, but also tracking devices that would reveal the location of servers, safe houses, and operational facilities that had remained hidden for 15 years. "Welcome to an organization that values practical professionals," Kellerman said. "I believe you'll find this relationship both financially rewarding and professionally satisfying." I smiled and shook hands with men whose real names would be known to law enforcement within hours, whose operational security had just been compromised by someone they thought they were recruiting. The irony was perfect in its mathematical precision. Prometheus had destroyed itself by trying to acquire an asset who didn't exist. But as I left the casino and walked through Monaco's narrow streets toward my hotel, I realized the mission wasn't complete. Harrison's team now had enough intelligence to begin arrests, but stopping Prometheus required more than capturing individual operatives. The network's resources and international connections meant that surviving elements could continue operations even if leadership was eliminated. I needed to identify their weapons storage facilities, communication infrastructure, and financial support systems. Most importantly, I needed to locate the shipping containers that were positioning weapons for attacks scheduled to begin in less than 4 months. Prometheus had made the mistake of trusting someone whose loyalty they couldn't verify, and that mistake would become their complete destruction. My encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Harrison confirming that surveillance teams had recorded every conversation, identified every participant, and begun coordinating with international partners who would simultaneously arrest Prometheus operatives across multiple continents. The casino gathering that was supposed to expand their operations had instead provided intelligence that would eliminate them. The hotel room's secure communication system connected me to Harrison's operations center in Vienna, where analysts were already processing intelligence that would prevent the largest terrorist attack in European history. Their voices carried the tension of professionals who understood they were racing against schedules that measured time in lives rather than tactical convenience. "Outstanding work," Harrison said, his relief evident despite encrypted communication that filtered emotion from voice patterns. "The intelligence you've provided gives us everything we need to begin immediate operations against Prometheus leadership."
What's the operational timeline? I asked, knowing that speed would be essential to prevent network elements from implementing contingency plans that could allow key personnel to escape. "Coordinated arrests begin in 6 hours, Harrison replied. "NATO intelligence services across 12 countries will simultaneously target facilities, personnel, and financial networks. By tomorrow morning, Prometheus will cease to exist as an operational entity." But I was already thinking beyond arrests and tactical operations. Prometheus had been selling American secrets for 15 years, compromising operations and getting intelligence officers killed in ways that would never be fully documented. The network's destruction would prevent future attacks, but it wouldn't resurrect the people whose deaths had been profitable transactions for men who wore patriotism like expensive suits. "There's something else," I said, accessing files on the modified smartphone that revealed information Kellerman probably hadn't intended to share. They've been documenting their operations. Names, dates, financial records, operational details, everything. The intelligence was comprehensive enough to identify every asset, every handler, every financial transaction that had sustained Prometheus operations since its establishment. Bank accounts that had laundered payments for stolen secrets, communication records that documented years of collaboration between intelligence professionals and terrorist organizations, personnel files that revealed which government officials had been compromised and which operations had been betrayed. "We're looking at prosecutions that could reach into the highest levels of multiple intelligence services," I continued, understanding that the political implications would be as significant as the operational consequences. "This goes beyond terrorism charges into systematic treason involving hundreds of people." Harrison's silence stretched long enough to suggest he was processing implications that extended far beyond preventing terrorist attacks. Prometheus hadn't just been selling intelligence, they'd been corrupting the institutions responsible for protecting democratic societies. Their destruction would create political earthquakes that could reshape intelligence services across NATO countries. "Elena Vasquez will need to disappear," Harrison finally said, his tone carrying the weight of decisions that would affect my life in ways that operational planning couldn't anticipate. "Her association with this investigation makes her a liability to surviving Prometheus elements who might attempt revenge operations." I understood the implication. Elena Vasquez would join Sarah Chen in official death, another identity burned in service of operations that required personal sacrifices that most people couldn't imagine. But this time, the sacrifice would prevent mass murder rather than simply protecting ongoing intelligence operations. "What about Miguel?" I asked, because personal attachments were always the casualties when operational requirements conflicted with emotional commitments. "Miguel will be told that Elena died in a car accident while traveling in Switzerland," Harrison replied. "Her body was destroyed in a fire that made identification impossible. He'll grieve for someone who never existed while the woman he loved assumes another identity in a different country." The mathematics were brutal but necessary. Miguel's safety depended on his ignorance about Elena's real activities, and my survival depended on his belief that our relationship had ended with her death rather than her deception. Love was another casualty of professional obligations that couldn't accommodate personal happiness. As dawn approached over the Mediterranean, I stood on my hotel balcony watching Monaco wake up to a day that would end differently than it began. By evening, the news would report coordinated arrests across Europe and North America. Prometheus would become a historical footnote rather than an ongoing threat. The terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of thousands of people would remain contingency plans rather than accomplished facts. But Sarah Chen would continue to be officially dead, buried beneath layers of operational security that made normal life impossible. The woman who had prevented mass murder would disappear again, leaving behind another identity and another love story that ended with lies designed to protect people who would never know how close they'd come to dying. My phone buzzed with final instructions from Harrison: new identity documents, financial arrangements, and relocation procedures that would transform me into someone else entirely. Another name, another history, another life built on the foundation of service that required sacrificing everything most people considered important. I deleted Elena Vasquez's files, encrypted communications, and digital footprint with the systematic thoroughness that left no traces for investigators who might try to reconstruct her activities. By noon, she would be as dead as Sarah Chen, remembered only by intelligence professionals whose work required keeping track of identities that officially never existed. The last message I sent was to Miguel using Elena's phone one final time. A simple text explaining that she loved him but had to leave immediately because of family emergencies that couldn't be delayed. Lies that would hurt him but wouldn't endanger him. The kind of professional deception that made personal relationships impossible for people whose real work couldn't be explained to anyone outside the intelligence community. Then I walked away from Elena Vasquez's life with the same methodical precision that had carried me through 15 years of existence. Another identity burned, another love story, another chapter in a life that belonged to operations rather than to the woman who executed them. But thousands of people would live through the next 4 months because someone who was supposed to be dead had prevented their murder. NATO would survive because Prometheus had been destroyed before it could complete operations that would have crippled democratic institutions across Europe and North America. Sometimes, the mathematics of sacrifice produced results that justified personal costs that couldn't be measured in conventional terms. The sun was fully risen when I boarded a flight to a destination that would remain classified in reports that wouldn't be written about operations that officially never happened. Another ghost returning to shadows where the dead continued serving causes that the living couldn't protect with help from people who didn't exist. Miguel would mourn Elena Vasquez, never knowing that his grief was honoring someone whose love had been real even though her name had been fiction. Harrison's team would process intelligence that would prevent terrorist attacks whose casualties would never be counted because the deaths never occurred. And somewhere in databases that tracked identities too dangerous for normal record-keeping, another name would be marked as deceased while the person who carried it disappeared into operational security that made resurrection impossible. The work continued, performed by people whose sacrifices couldn't be acknowledged and whose successes couldn't be celebrated. But the world remained safe for another day, protected by ghosts who served from beyond official death, because some kinds of service required abandoning everything that made life worth living for everyone else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.